Hey guys, tonight we slip into the softly echoing world of ancient Rome, where the scent of olive oil mingles with something a bit funkier. Picture a long stone bench with evenly spaced holes overlooking a gentle channel of flowing water. You trudge onto the cold marble and take your place. No privacy, no pretense, just honest Olympus communal relief. You probably won't survive this in the sense that you may never sit the same way again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Throw a comment below with your location and local time. I'm curious who's joining the Lou Conspiracy live, and we'll get started. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle on the stone seat amid a line of fellow Romans. Water flows gently beneath, a real-time sanitation system, courtesy of Rome's engineering genius. Historians still argue whether these public toilets were primarily hygiene-driven or civic gathering spots. A stranger yawns next to you. You collectively inhale that mixed aroma, olive groves, worn leather sandals, and something decidedly more intestinal. It's normal. You shift slightly. The seat is smooth, cold, and shaped to cradle your backside in ways that, in 2025, would raise a designer's eyebrows. You clasp the side support, actually part of the stone, and realize how much you miss modern cushions. This isn't glamorous. It's real life, Roman style. A distant echo of voices drifts in, probably other guests reacting to an especially bold passage in their scrolls. Meanwhile, the sanitation water flows below, carrying waste away almost poetically. This is mainstream historical fact. Romans installed latrines in their bath complexes, military forts, and city centers, connected to sewer systems like the Cloaca Maxima. Beside you, the man wearing a simple tunic nods philosophically, as if the echoing flush provides auditory insight. Another holds a scroll in one hand and ducks out a clause about duty and virtue. They're not throwing shade, they're letting earthy substances pass. You breathe in, sit back slightly, and let the gentle hum of the latrina, the chill stone, the tinkling water, start to lull you toward sleep, or at least toward a quieter mind. There's something oddly calming about being in a room full of strangers doing basically the same thing. It's human, historic, and yes, a bit stinky. Scholars still argue whether Romans truly understood the health risks or just trusted their plumbing gods, and maybe skipped question hygiene because it interfered with philosophical debates. But here, now, you're part of it. Sitting. Listening. Letting the soft drip of water coax your thoughts free. 3 light jokes in, you think about the world's first bathroom break, mood ring. You consider giving a pep talk to your own colon. And you wonder if modern influencers would sponsor Rome's toilets. #Latina Lounge? Your eyelids grow heavy. You lean back, supported by cool marble. Rome's public toilet, surprisingly, is the perfect stage for quiet reflection and sleepiness. The seat is still cold, but your body has adjusted, sort of. The hard stone presses just the right places to remind you that yes, this is a Roman latrina, and no, ergonomics wasn't invented yet. You shift slightly, trying not to appear too fidgety in front of your fellow co-sitters. The man to your left clears his throat. The one to your right sighs as though he's just solved a metaphysical riddle, or possibly just released some tension. The layout is what strikes you now. This isn't a random row of holes in the ground. No, the Romans planned this. A curved, almost architectural rhythm to the placement of the benches. No partitions, of course. That would ruin the whole point. Communal transparency, spatial democracy, and absolutely no secrets when it comes to digestion. Here's your historical fact. Roman latrines were often built with up to 20 seats or more, in long lines or semicircles. There were no dividing walls. Why? Because privacy wasn't a major concern. Shared space was the default, even in matters of the bowels. For many, this was the most conversation they'd have all day. Bodily functions, politics, philosophy, it all went in, it all came out. The floor beneath your sandals is tiled, worn smooth by countless footsteps and the gentle scrape of tunic hems. You spot a mosaic near the entrance, half damaged, but still legible. A dolphin, some olives, and what may be either a sponge or a poorly drawn loaf of bread. You decide it's both. You lean back against the wall. The acoustics here are something else. Every cough is amplified, every whisper oddly resonant. You find yourself speaking more softly just to keep from sounding like a proclamation. To your right, a woman with a scroll is discussing Stoic theory. Not loudly. Just enough for her seatmate to nod along in sleepy agreement. The Stoics were into this sort of thing: acceptance, endurance, the dignity of dealing with whatever life, or lunch, throws at you. Here's your quirky tidbit: some latrines had built-in shelves for scrolls. It's debated whether they were meant for casual reading or just a place to rest your notes, while multitasking. That's right, Romans may have invented the original bathroom book club. You turn your head to listen, trying not to make it obvious. The woman is quoting Epictetus. Something about external discomforts being beneath your concern. You find yourself nodding. Maybe he was talking about the state of your rear end after 20 minutes on carved limestone. Or maybe life. Could be both. Historians still argue, the woman says between lines, whether these spaces were truly philosophical hotspots or if people just couldn't hold it in any longer and ended up waxing wise while waiting for relief. Her companion chuckles. You chuckle. The toilet echoes agreeably. It's strange, you think. Back home, this would be awkward. You'd avoid eye contact. But here it feels ordinary. Even soothing. Like everything important has been stripped away, leaving only conversation and a very effective drainage system. Joke 1. You consider how modern motivational posters would look hung here. Hang in there with a mosaic of someone clenching both fists and eyes. Joke 2. You imagine a news saying, all roads lead to Rome, but all Romans lead to this bench. Joke 3. You wonder whether the philosopher next to you knows her lecture has a kind of bowel movement crescendo. You keep that one to yourself. Your legs stretch a bit, toes flexing on the cool tile. You glance around at the other patrons. Some are listening. Some are napping. One man hums softly and taps his heel against the stone, sinking with the gentle ripple of the sanitation stream beneath. It's not glamorous. It's not clean, not by modern standards. But it's human. Deeply, comically, charmingly human. The sort of place where no one pretends to be too dignified. Not even the people quoting Seneca while adjusting their tunics. You inhale, exhale. The smell isn't good, exactly, but it's bearable. Earthy. Lived in. Like being inside a clay pot filled with garlic, lemon rinds, and polite regret. And as your breathing slows, you feel something unusual. Not disgust. Not boredom. But calm. This is the Roman toilet. This is history. This is a seat made for sitting, thinking, and maybe, just maybe, understanding yourself a little better. You close your eyes. The drain murmurs. The philosophers drone gently on. Sleep, like a slow-moving sewer current, begins to drift toward you. Your eyes drift lazily across the stone grooves beneath the bench, and you notice it for the first time. A line of wooden handles stacked neatly in a clay trough, their ends darkened by water and something else. You squint. The man across from you notices, chuckles quietly, and raises an eyebrow as if to say yes. That's exactly what you think it is. Welcome to the world of the tersorium, Rome's most infamous hygiene tool. Essentially, a sponge on a stick. Used for cleansing one's posterior after doing one's business. Communal, of course. Nothing screams shared civic duty like the polite dunk and dab of a sponge used by strangers. Here's your historical fact. The Romans didn't use toilet paper. Instead, public latrines featured a long channel of running water in front of the bench, where people would rinse the tersorium before and after use. It was the ultimate in utilitarian hygiene, functional, a little gross, and in its own way, impressively effective. You lean forward slightly to get a better look. The water flowing through the channel is clean, cold, and constant. One person dips a tersorium, gives it a soft swirl, and lets it rest again on the rim of the trough like a baton awaiting its next runner. Historians still argue, Someone murmurs from your left, whether the tersoria were individual tools or shared between users. Some say people brought their own. Others? Well, he trails off, letting the implication settle like a whiff of vinegar and regret. You sit a little straighter. Suddenly, your bench feels even colder. Quirky tidbit time. In some latrines, vinegar jars were placed nearby. People could rinse the sponge in vinegar water, partly to clean it, partly for spiritual reassurance. Because nothing quite says ritual purification like praying over a communal butt sponge. You shift your weight as someone steps carefully between the benches, adjusting his toga like a curtain caught in a breeze. He hums an off-key melody and plucks a tersorium from the line with the confidence of a man who's accepted life's messy truths. He sits, nods, begins a monologue about virtue. Because of course he does. Is not the sponge, too, a teacher of philosophy? He asks the air. It is humble, absorbent, cleansing. Is that not the Stoic way? A few people chuckle. You're not sure if it's out of agreement, or just appreciation for a man waxing poetic mid-squat. Either way, you decide you'll remember this moment next time someone brings up ancient wisdom. Joke 1. You wonder if ancient Rome had sponge sales. Buy one, get one squishy. Joke 2. Maybe Stoicism really is just accepting you're next in line for a used cleaning stick. Joke 3. You imagine modern spas marketing tersoria as Mediterranean exfoliation wands. Available now. With citrus oil. You glance up at the wall. More graffiti. Someone has carved a perfect little sponge on stick doodle, with the Latin phrase beneath, abluit ergo sum. I cleanse, therefore I am. You smile. Somewhere, Descartes shivers. Back to the present, your own seat remains sponge-free for now. A blessing. Or a delay? You glance at the trough, then back at the speaker, who's now comparing moral courage to rinsing cold water over raw skin. You wish he wouldn't. Still, you can't help but admire the way Romans built reflection into even the most routine acts. There's no curtain between soul-searching and sponge-dabbing here. Everything's part of the same cycle: entrance, release, rinse, debate, leave. The mind and body, equally relieved. A young man a few seats down raises his hand and interrupts with, "But what if the sponge is symbolic?" He's serious. The speaker pauses. Blinks. Nods slowly. It's happening again. The bathroom debate is beginning to loop back into itself. Time and rinses are both circular. You lean your head back against the cool stone wall, and for a moment, imagine the water carrying little sponge-sized boats downstream, each carrying tiny scrolls of philosophy, tiny thoughts, tiny gentle truths. And then you think, maybe this isn't strange at all. Maybe it's exactly where thinking happens best. The gentle trickle of water continues to hum beneath the bench, blending with the rustle of tunics and the occasional philosophical grunt. You sit quietly, still mulling over the symbolic sponge when a new detail grabs your attention: the walls. Not the structure, those you've admired already, but what's on them. Scratched, scribbled, and in some cases quite elegantly etched into the stone is a wild sprawl of Latin graffiti. Some short and punchy, others long and winding. You lean forward, squinting to decipher the nearest one. It reads, "Marcus owes me 2 figs and still stinks." A classic burn. You smile. Here's your historical fact. Roman public toilets were often covered in graffiti. Everything from political insults to jokes to poetry. They weren't merely rest stops. They were public forums, a sort of chalkboard of the people where any passing posterior could leave behind their thoughts, frustrations, or literary experiments. You shift your gaze to the next line. This one is more poetic. She came, she saw, she sat. Beneath it, in smaller script, someone has added, dot, and then complained about the cold. The wall is practically a scroll, layered, opinionated, unapologetically public. You see love notes, crude cartoons, philosophical musings, and at least one stick figure clearly having a rough time with lunch. To your left, a man reads aloud from a spot above his shoulder. All glory is fleeting, but a good latrine endures. Another replies, "That's from Plautus, isn't it?" No, the first one says. I think it's just true. You smile again. This space, echoing with drips and doodles, is oddly alive. It's not a dead ruin, it's a still-breathing notebook. A stone timeline of people needing to go, and deciding they had something to say while doing so. Here's your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found graffiti in Pompeii's latrines that directly insult local politicians by name. Imagine being publicly roasted next to a sponge pit. That's real democracy. Historians still argue, murmurs a nearby scholar who's clearly been lurking in this latrine too long, whether the graffiti was officially ignored, tolerated, or secretly adored. No one ever got arrested for it. But no one ever praised it either. Like Parsley. Or theater critics. He wipes his brow and continues reading. You shift again, letting your legs stretch beneath the bench, your toes tracing little circles in the cool dust. A young woman near the water trough clears her throat. Excuse me, she says, addressing no one in particular, but why are there more jokes here than in the forum? An older man near the corner answers without looking up from his parchment. Because no one here's pretending to be clever. Just honest. Joke 1, you imagine a Roman Yelp review. Toilet's a bit echoey. 5 stars for graffiti. Sponge was moist. August 10th. Joke 2, you wonder how many arguments began because someone saw their name next to a drawing of a goat. Joke 3, you consider carving your own message. If you read this, you're sitting too long. The graffiti sprawls onward, looping into a joke about Cato the Elder and a very unfortunate bean stew. A line of poetry follows it, musing on the flow of water and fate. Then someone else scrawled, who keeps stealing the vinegar? In bold, annoyed strokes. It's chaotic. It's brilliant. It's incredibly human. You start to understand. The walls are telling a story just as much as the seats. This isn't just a functional pit stop. It's Rome's most honest diary. The kind no one meant to keep, but everyone helped write. The water below gurgles. The seat beneath you creaks faintly. You lean back and close your eyes, letting the wall's words swirl softly in your head. Marcus. Beans. Honor. Smell. All equal now in the toilet archive of history. This is where truth lives. Between the drain and the doodle. You've just finished decoding a rather detailed doodle of Jupiter wearing what appears to be a toga made entirely of figs when a new voice echoes softly across the latrina. It's calm, assured, and slightly nasal, perfectly suited to project philosophical wisdom across a row of exposed thighs. I tell you, the voice says, the body is a vessel, and suffering is its maintenance fee. You turn your head. 3 seats down, perched with impeccable posture, sits a man whose expression radiates weary enlightenment. His tunic is neatly folded, his sandals untouched by mud, and a scroll lies unrolled across his lap. A Stoic, clearly. Maybe even a real one, not just someone who read Epictetus once, and now quotes him every time the olives run out. 2 listeners lean toward him, one slightly uncomfortable from digestion, the other nodding like a student caught between admiration and indigestion. You sink back against the cool wall. It's happening again. The Roman toilet lecture. Here's your historical fact. Public latrines weren't just for private business. In the bustling social life of Rome, they became gathering spots where people talked politics, exchanged gossip, and yes, delivered philosophical monologues. Think of them as the ancient world's least hygienic TED Talks. The Stoic clears his throat, unbothered by a small belch from a nearby listener. Pain is unavoidable, he continues, but dignity is a choice. Especially when seated. His audience murmurs appreciation. Someone drops a sponge into the trough with a plop. The sound is not dignified, but no one flinches. Historians still argue, the Stoic says with a dramatic pause, whether philosophy is best taught in the academy or the streets. But I argue, why not the latrine? He gestures at the air as if the echo itself will cast a vote. You resist the urge to clap. Here's your quirky tidbit. The philosopher Seneca once wrote extensively on bodily functions, noting how even the great minds cannot escape indigestion. He often used metaphors drawn from daily routines, bathing, walking, and yes, sitting, to explain abstract concepts. Maybe, just maybe, this guy has a point. The listener on the left, a younger man with a scroll tucked behind his ear, pipes up. But if the body is a vessel, who's steering the ship? He asks. Consciousness, replies the Stoic, with fate as the wind, and free will as the paddle. You hear someone mutter, he's mixing metaphors again, but it's soft, respectful. The floor is his now. Joke 1. You imagine the Stoic going on tour. Catch me this Saturnalia at Latrine 4. 2 shows nightly, bring your own sponge. Joke 2. You imagine a heckler shouting that's deep. And the Stoic replying yes like Rome's sewer system. Joke 3. You wonder if anyone's ever given birth to a new philosophy here, mid-squat. Stoicism born from stomach cramps. Makes sense. The breeze drifts through the open doorway, carrying with it the scent of citrus and smoke. Someone's cooking nearby. You hear the distant clang of a pan and the cheerful bickering of market vendors. Inside, the philosopher continues, now moving into questions of moderation and appetite. To eat beyond hunger is to deny the body's wisdom, he intones, as a man 3 seats down noisily unwraps a fig cake. The timing is impeccable. You glance again at the trough of water. It bubbles gently beneath the benches, a kind of lulling stream that seems to carry not just waste, but worries. You think of the flow of words, of ideas, of things released both physically and mentally here. It's strange. It shouldn't work. But it does. Sitting side by side, unfiltered and exposed, something opens. People talk. People listen. And occasionally someone says something worth remembering, even if they're also holding their knees. You stretch your arms, listening to the rhythm of the monologue as it winds toward a sleepy conclusion. To know oneself, the Stoic concludes, is to accept what exits. And what remains. The audience, such as it is, nods. One man sneezes. You smile. Philosophy, it turns out, really can come from anywhere. Even here. The Stoic pauses at last, scroll rolling gently back into its compact form with a satisfying papery sigh. His audience, now thoroughly relieved in both body and spirit, leans back. One of them yawns. Another scratches idly at his sandal strap. The latrina returns to a gentle hum of shuffling feet and trickling water, the soundscape of a society at partial rest. You inhale the scent of damp stone and vinegar. Not pleasant, but oddly grounding. The sort of smell that says, yes, this is life, in bold, unperfumed letters. You shift slightly, less to get comfortable, more to stay awake. The air has the warmth of an overcooked lentil and the patience of an olive tree. To your right, someone mutters, "Where's Seneca when you need him?" And then, as if summoned by that rhetorical shrug, a new voice cuts in, not as theatrical as the Stoic, but clearer. Smoother. A little annoyed. You know, says the man perched on the far end of the bench, Seneca wrote entire treatises on how to suffer with grace, but I doubt he ever had to sit through a plumbing backup while explaining the soul. Here's your historical fact. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, one of Rome's most famous Stoics, often used metaphor drawn from daily discomforts to explain resilience, clarity of thought, and the importance of disengaging from life's more irritating theatrics. He believed in detachment, but he also knew what it meant to stub a toe on a badly placed amphora. The man lifts one foot off the floor, wiggles it to show a small scrape, and then sighs dramatically. Probably a sign from fortune, he mutters, and someone snickers. Historians still argue, he continues, whether Seneca actually lived his philosophy or just wrote it to feel better about living like a rich man who preached simplicity. He shrugs. But I suppose it's easy to sound wise when your sponge is embroidered. This earns a few chuckles. You nod slightly, mulling that over. There is something comforting in the idea that even the great minds of Rome had bad days. That even Seneca had to balance writing essays on virtue while waiting for his feet to dry at the bathhouse. The man speaks again. He once wrote that we must suffer without complaint. But I'm not convinced he ever sat through a midday latrine session in August. He waves his hand toward the archway, where sunlight bakes the stones outside to an aggressive toastiness. Another listener, shifting uncomfortably on the bench, mutters, or shared a sponge with 3 senators and a poet with questionable aim. Here's your quirky tidbit. Seneca often described the body as a temporary burden, something to be respected but not obsessed over. However, some fragments of his letters suggest he took detailed care of his health routines, including his bowel habits. One line even refers to the tyranny of lentils, though that may have been a metaphor for Senate debates. Or lunch. You shift again, testing the sore spot on your hip. Maybe you're becoming stoic by osmosis. Or maybe you just can't feel anything anymore. The man sighs again. Still, he was right about one thing. Pain is temporary. But foolishness is eternal. He casts a glance at a nearby scribe trying to use his wax tablet while seated. The stylus wobbles precariously. Joke 1. You wonder if there was a Senate position called Praetor of Plunging. Joke 2. You imagine Seneca publishing a limited edition sponge. Wipe away your ego. Joke 3. You picture Stoic motivational posters. Feel nothing. Especially that bench. You close your eyes and listen. The voices are softer now, fading into shared grunts, mumbles, and one rhythmic clack of sandal on stone. You wonder what Seneca would say about sleep. Probably something like, accept the rest, for the world will continue in its absurdity whether you're awake or not. The man to your right finishes his quiet tirade with a shrug and returns to silence. Not smug, not enlightened, just content. You lean back again. The air is thick and drowsy, like a soup that's been left to simmer all afternoon. You feel your thoughts float like the little boats of sponge and straw that some child may have launched down the stream of waste long ago, imagining them bound for philosophy, fame, or just a quieter corner of the empire. And you let go a little. Because even if you're not stoic yet, you're tired. And that's close enough. You haven't moved for what feels like half an hour. Not because you're trapped in some stoic trance, but because your legs are finally warm and the bench has stopped feeling like an accusation. The conversation has mellowed, like a slow stream curving through a quiet valley. Which is convenient, because just beyond the archway, another stream murmurs softly, the public baths. Someone rises from their seat, groaning theatrically, and says, time to cleanse the soul, and everything else. He drifts toward the doorway with the air of a man who's got opinions about both soap and metaphysics. You follow, your knees cracking in protest but your curiosity intact. The transition is seamless. From the shadowy echo of the latrina to the steamy glow of the therme next door, the scent changes from vinegar and moss to oils, eucalyptus, and that faintly alarming heat that makes your nose itch. Here's your historical fact. Roman bathhouses were often built adjacent to or even connected with public toilets. The logic was simple: one space to relieve, another to refresh. You'd move from latrine to bath like chapters in a very specific hygiene saga. And yes, the talking continued. Inside the tepidarium, steam curls around your ankles like sleepy cats. The voices are quieter here, wrapped in the softness of warm air. You settle onto a marble bench, mercifully warmer than the last one, and exhale slowly. The walls sweat with condensation. The philosophers sweat with certainty. One man is already talking, of course. Lounging by a column with a towel draped over one shoulder, he speaks with the lyrical cadence of someone who really wants to be quoted. The mind, like the body, must be rinsed daily, he says. Otherwise it begins to crust. Another man, submerged up to his chin, replies, are you saying you've crusted? Laughter bubbles up. Steam swirls. Here's your quirky tidbit. Roman bathhouses sometimes featured small libraries or reading rooms. Think of it, a scroll in one hand, a glass of wine in the other, feet gently soaking in warm water. Cleanliness, conversation, and casual quotes from Virgil, all in one package. Historians still argue, someone murmurs, whether bathhouse debates ever led to actual change, or if everyone just liked the sound of their own voice in steam. You're pretty sure the answer is yes. A philosopher near the entrance begins comparing the heat of the caldarium to the heat of political discourse. Both burn, he says. One opens pores. The other opens lawsuits. He slips off his sandals with a grimace and waddles toward the hot plunge like a martyr. Joke 1. you imagine a wellness retreat modeled after Roman baths. This week's package includes cucumber water, public nudity, and a debate about moral decay. Joke 2, you wonder if the original bathhouse mantra was clean body, unclear politics. Joke 3, you picture a motivational towel embroidered with, you can't spell aqueduct without a quest for clarity. Someone hands you a small flask of oil, nothing fancy, just a little rosemary and myrrh. You rub it into your hands, feeling it loosen the skin softened by the bathhouse mist. Another man beside you stretches luxuriously and says, philosophy is easier when you're moist. No one contradicts him. You glance toward the corner where an old man snoozes beneath a window. His toes twitch now and then. You're not sure if he's dreaming of better arguments, or just remembering lunch. Either way, he's reached enlightenment, or close enough to make you jealous. The philosopher by the column is still going, now making a point about desire and temperature regulation. His hair sticks to his forehead. His logic? Less so. But everyone listens, nodding like they've just heard something profound. You let your thoughts drift again. The bath. The toilet. The voices. It all blends. A seamless, soothing loop of stimulation and stillness. Of heat and humor. There's no separation between mind and body here. Everything flows, like the water beneath the tiles and the chatter above them. You let your eyes close for a moment. Not to sleep. Just to soak. Just to listen to the warm air agree with itself. The steam wraps itself around your shoulders like a damp toga as you rise slowly from the marble bench. It clings to you just long enough to whisper, "Are you sure you want to leave this warmth?" But you do. Or at least, you follow the voices drifting back into the adjoining corridor where cool air meets the faint but ever-loyal scent of latrine vinegar. It's not long before you're back in the main chamber, where the echoes haven't cooled down with the stone. The crowd hasn't thinned, if anything more have gathered. A few new scrolls are unfurled, and the tone has shifted. Philosophy has turned political. You slide back onto your familiar bench, your tunic a little damp, your sandals squeaky with bathwater. A man with a furrowed brow and a voice like grated stone is pacing slowly between the seated patrons, quoting Cicero with the urgency of a man who thinks the Republic might collapse during this very bathroom break. Here's your historical fact. Roman latrines, especially in large cities like Rome and Ostia, weren't merely for relief. They became places where politics were aired freely. No official Senate records exist of legislation being passed on the pot. But it's not hard to imagine opinions forming here, especially after 3 cups of wine and a bad garum fish sauce breakfast. Justice, the man says now, raising a hand as if the room were on trial, is not born from bloodlines or bathhouses, but from the bowel-born truth that all men sit the same way. A scattered applause. One man grunts. Another snorts so hard he startles the sponge trough. Historians still argue, says a softer voice nearby, whether plebeians truly believe they had a say in civic life, or if public spaces like this merely offered them the illusion of participation. You glance at the speaker. He's reclining with the serenity of someone who knows the difference between skepticism and constipation. But I say, he adds, if you speak loudly enough in the toilet, someone will think you're important. A woman with a scroll tied to her waist adds, and if you quote Cicero loudly enough, someone will move seats. Joke 1. You imagine a Senate meeting relocated to the latrina for transparency. Joke 2. You consider designing political campaign posters that read, as seen in Latrine 4. Joke 3. You picture a debate moderator yelling, "Senator, your turn to speak is after you've rinsed." The man quoting Cicero has now switched to moral decay, linking it loosely to sponge sanitation. His metaphors are strained. But no one seems to mind. They've come to listen, to nod, to laugh, and occasionally to relieve themselves. You begin to notice the rhythm of it all. Someone speaks. Someone interjects. Someone sighs so deeply it echoes like a prophecy. Then silence, brief, respectful, like an inhale, before it all starts again. The topics drift, as they always do, from taxes on fish sauce, to a proposal to ban clanging sandals in the forum, to a long and vivid comparison between Senate seating charts and the current latrine bench layout. You listen. You nod. You occasionally shift your weight because the bench is, after all, still stone. And in the middle of it all, the sound of the flowing water continues, soft, consistent, indifferent to politics. The latrine itself does not vote. But it hosts. That's enough. A young boy, likely a scribe's apprentice, whispers to his neighbor, "Do you think the emperor knows people talk about him here?" The neighbor whispers back, "Only if the sponge spies." And just like that, the moment shifts again. From heavy to light. From argument to jest. You feel the warmth of it settle into the corners of the room like lamplight. Politics, it seems, is just another kind of digestion. And everyone here has something to pass. The tone has mellowed again, like a belly after good bread and a better nap. The heavy Cicero-quoting man has finally sat down, perhaps from exhaustion, or perhaps because his thighs were tired of making political points unsupported. The air is lighter now, filled with quiet rustlings and one lone hiccup that earns a smattering of laughter. That's when the Epicureans arrive. You spot them immediately. They glide in like they've just emerged from an olive grove with nothing to do and everything to say. Loose tunics, sandals polished to a smug shine, and, of course, a small tray of snacks. Olives. A wedge of cheese. A single fig cut artfully in half. One of them, a man with sun-creased skin and the sort of smile that says "I refuse to suffer unless the wine is corked," strolls to the bench beside you. He sits slowly, deliberately, as if the latrine is a chaise lounge in his personal garden. "I see the Stoics have been active," he says, pulling a fig from the tray and nibbling it without shame. "Grim men, those. Always bracing for disaster. Can't even enjoy a soft stool." You choke on a laugh. Here's your historical fact. Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus, was all about seeking pleasure, not wild indulgence, but modest, sustainable joys. A good meal, a good conversation, and freedom from fear. Epicureans were often mocked by other schools for being soft, but they were quietly serious about living well. The fig-eater gestures broadly. "This," he says, "is the perfect place for philosophy. The body speaks, the mind listens. Everything flows." The other Epicureans settle in. One offers almonds to a grumpy bathhouse veteran. Another gently wipes down a sponge handle with a cloth from his sash, humming an optimistic tune. They're very comfortable. "Historians still argue," says the fig philosopher, "whether Epicurus would have approved of debating in a toilet. Personally, I think he'd have preferred a sunny garden, but he'd appreciate the honesty of it." He grins, chewing. No masks here. Everyone leaves something behind. You glance around. The tension has eased. Even the die-hard Stoics look, well, slightly less clenched. Here's your quirky tidbit. Epicureans often shared meals as part of their teachings. They believed friendship was one of life's greatest pleasures and that most debates went better with dates, wine, and a seat that didn't wobble. An Epicurean to your left uncorks a tiny flask and pours a splash of something fragrant into a small clay cup. "To the digestive gods," he says, raising it high. "And to the men who designed these benches with no backs." Joke 1. You imagine Epicureans reviewing this latrine on TripAdvisor. Ambience, 4 stars. Smells honest. Snack shelf, needs work. Joke 2. You wonder if they'll start plating their olives on the sponge trough. Joke 3. You picture an Epicurean bath party getting lost and ending up here, deciding it's good enough and staying anyway. The Stoics look mildly perturbed, but no one says anything. Not yet. The fig man continues, now monologuing on the quiet ecstasy of good bowel health. It's surprisingly poetic. A few nod along. You feel a curious sense of balance forming, a kind of philosophical osmosis. Stoics frowning a little less. Epicureans wiping down the marble with surprising courtesy. Politics forgotten, sponges gleaming, and one man asleep with his hand still in the olive bowl. A single bee buzzes in through the doorway, circles twice, then leaves again. Even it seems reluctant to interrupt. You exhale, slow and steady. This is strange. This is serene. This is the kind of peace only a well-fed philosopher can deliver, mid-latrine, under a fig-heavy argument. You shift your weight and listen. And smile. Because you've never been more at ease. The air feels heavier now, not with tension, but with the slow-baked satisfaction of full bellies and worn-out arguments. A soft lull spreads through the latrina like incense, the kind you can only get after a solid hour of swapping thoughts, sponges, and subtle gasps of "ah, that's the point." Then, like a match to olive oil, it happens. A single, unmistakable sound cuts through the room, a prolonged, unapologetic burst of flatulence from somewhere near the middle row. There's a brief pause, followed by a ripple of laughter, some polite, some delightedly unhinged. And just like that, the debate resumes. "I told you beans upset the natural balance of the humors," says a slightly smug voice, probably a Stoic who's secretly been hoping for this exact moment. To eat them is to surrender control of your bodily province. From the Epicurean camp, but what's control without joy? A meal without legumes is like a story without mischief. You're not sure who started it. You are sure that the topic is now beans. Here's your historical fact. Beans were a common part of the Roman diet, cheap, filling, and available to all classes. They were also associated with a variety of superstitions, especially in the Pythagorean tradition, where followers famously avoided beans altogether. Some said they trapped souls. Others just said they made dinner parties awkward. The argument grows spirited. One man, perched grandly on his seat like a scholar atop Mount Farticus, declares, "The legume is the philosopher's test. What good is wisdom if it cannot endure wind?" To which another replies, "Tell that to the man seated behind you." Even the Stoic can't help but smirk. Here's your quirky tidbit. In ancient Rome, it wasn't uncommon to blame flatulence on the gods, or to thank them, depending on how it cleared the room. One small shrine discovered in a rural villa featured an inscription to Crepitus, the semi-joking god of flatulence, though most scholars believe he was a parody or theatrical invention. Historians still argue, someone says over the laughter, whether Pythagoras banned beans due to digestion, or because he believed they contained the souls of the dead. You glance at your seatmate. Well, that's one way to ruin a salad. He snorts, then gestures to the olive tray. Still safer than fermented fish sauce. A young boy, a water runner likely, pokes his head in from the corridor and yells, "Mama says no lentils next Saturnalia," before scampering off again. The room erupts. Even the sleepy bathgoer in the corner raises his sponge in solidarity. Joke 1. You imagine an entire branch of philosophy founded on dietary regrets. Call it gassicism. Joke 2. You consider designing a Roman food pyramid where beans are labeled optional. Handle with caution. Joke 3. You wonder if Cicero ever lost a debate due to timing. Despite the levity, something profound is happening beneath the laughter. People are letting go. In every sense. There's vulnerability in laughter, especially the kind born from shared embarrassment. There's philosophy, too, in the idea that you can't think clearly unless you're comfortable enough to be human in front of others. The Epicurean munches thoughtfully on a date. "I say the body teaches us everything," he offers, between chews. "We pretend we are logic and law, but really, we are rhythm and release." No one disagrees. Not even the man still pretending he wasn't the one who started the whole thing. The debate continues softly, half serious, half sleepy, all sincere. You close your eyes, the murmurs blurring into a steady hum. Laughter still lingers in the air, delicate as incense. Somewhere, a fig rolls off a tray and lands with a dignified thud. You sigh. You smile. You think, perhaps for the first time, that philosophy should be a little ridiculous. And that maybe, just maybe, truth travels fastest on the wind. You stir slightly, blinking slow and lazy, as the latrine murmurs with a new kind of energy. The laughter from the great bean debate still echoes faintly in the corners, but the mood has shifted, like an audience settling after intermission. People aren't just bantering now. They're organizing. A few have shuffled closer to the center of the room. Others reposition themselves, pulling scrolls from under their tunics or adjusting their seating to face the latest speaker more directly. The Epicureans are leaning forward with olives poised midair. A Stoic sharpens a stylus with exaggerated focus. Even the sponge trough looks vaguely reverent. The latrine, dear listener, has become a symposium. Here's your historical fact. In ancient Rome, the symposium wasn't just a Greek leftover. It evolved into a Roman tradition where people gathered to dine, drink, and debate. While traditionally held in dining rooms or private gardens, impromptu symposiums could unfold anywhere: baths, markets, and yes, even public toilets. Any place with seats, company, and the right kind of boredom. The speaker this time is a portly man in a patched toga, hair wild in all directions. He waves a half-peeled pomegranate like a baton. I propose, he announces grandly, that the latrine is the truest democratic forum. All opinions here are equal, all citizens seated at the same level, and all bound by a mutual humility. Someone claps. Someone else drops a sponge in agreement. The speaker goes on, balancing between passion and indigestion. In here, there are no togas of rank. No marble thrones. The emperor sits no higher than the olive merchant. Here, all are reduced, quite literally, to the basics of being. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Roman thinkers wrote about the philosophical value of humility through bodily acts. Pliny the Elder described how great thinkers maintained balance by acknowledging the decay and renewal of the flesh, especially during illness or routine. Bodily realism was seen as a grounding force, one that kept arrogance in check. You lean into the quiet chuckles and nods of agreement. There's something oddly moving about watching strangers debate dignity while perched above a shallow stream of wastewater. Historians still argue, says a pale man near the rear wall, whether these kinds of gatherings truly carried influence outside the walls. But I say, if thoughts are shared, and ideas considered, then influence has already begun. The speaker gestures toward a man scribbling furiously on a wax tablet. You there, scribe. What's your record of this moment? The scribe blinks, wipes his brow, and replies, so far I've written, mild flatulence, rising debate, figs. Perfect, says the speaker. History in the making. Joke 1. You imagine applying for a job in ancient Rome with a resume that lists toilet symposium participant, proficient in metaphor and sponge etiquette. Joke 2. You wonder if there was ever a dispute over speaking order, followed by a duel with ladles. Joke 3. You picture a symposium guestbook carved into the wall. Lucius was here. Spoke about beans. Regrets nothing. The participants begin raising questions now, one by one. What is freedom, really, if our bodies trap us daily? Do smells have moral weight? Is a clean latrine more civilizing than a clean law? A woman in the corner suggests that perhaps the sponge is the real philosopher here, quiet, adaptable, and rarely thanked. Someone else says the sponge is a coward, absorbing everything and offering nothing. Debate ensues. Your legs are stiff. Your back slightly damp. But your mind, somehow, is sharp, like the air before a thunderstorm, or the first breeze after a hot bath. This is ridiculous, you think, and somehow perfect. Because in a world where marble halls echo with forced rhetoric and dining rooms bristle with performative wit, there's something beautifully honest about a room of half-clothed citizens, respectfully debating ideas with all the dignity that a stone seat and a shared sponge will allow. The symposium continues. And you stay. Someone has fashioned a small speaker's platform out of an overturned amphora crate and a couple of folded tunics. It's not particularly stable, and it smells faintly of olives and damp wool, but it works. A new orator climbs up, tall, with a nose like a sail and the eager look of someone who's been waiting to monologue since breakfast. He holds up a scroll dramatically. It unravels all the way to his sandal and curls slightly, like it's shy. Fellow seat warmers, he declares, I rise, though I was perfectly comfortable, to ask the question none have dared pose, what if the latrine is not just democratic, but sacred? There's a collective murmur. One Epicurean gasps theatrically. A Stoic stiffens. Someone to your left spills a handful of raisins. Here's your historical fact. Sanitation in Rome wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. The Romans had minor gods and household spirits connected to nearly every act of domestic life, including defecation. There was even a protective deity for sewage systems, Cloacina, goddess of the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's massive central drain. The goddess Cloacina, the speaker says, pacing carefully on the crate, protected not only the flow of water, but the flow of society. To neglect her temple was to invite chaos. So why not revere this space, not just as a necessity, but as a kind of shrine? A woman from the back calls out, "Then where are the offerings?" To which a man shouts, "Under the bench, if you're brave." Laughter again. But the speaker holds firm. Let us elevate the latrine. Let it be not merely a pit stop but a pilgrimage, a place of reflection, confession, and rebirth. For do we not leave something of ourselves behind each time? Here's your quirky tidbit. Roman wedding ceremonies often included rituals at the threshold of the home involving sweeping and water, symbolically cleaning out bad spirits. Some households even kept small charms near their toilets to ward off mischievous sprites. Whether these were spiritual or just early plumbing hacks, no one's quite sure. Historians still argue, he continues, whether Cloacina was a true deity or just an adopted name for a civic utility. But I ask you, what is divinity, if not the thing we count on most when everything else is breaking loose? Polite groans. Too much, someone mutters, but the speaker grins. You glance to your side, where an old man has now tied a strip of cloth to a sponge handle and planted it upright next to the bench like a miniature standard. If this is sacred, he says, we'll need rituals. An enthusiastic nod from a young girl beside him, who immediately begins humming what she claims is a purification chant. It's mostly vowel sounds and awkward pauses, but it catches on. Joke 1. You imagine a religious order founded here, complete with sponge blessings and ceremonial vinegar. Joke 2. You picture little clay figurines of Cloacina sold at latrine entrances. Bless this mess. Joke 3. You wonder if the next emperor will commission a temple to digestive harmony. The speaker rolls his scroll back up, satisfied. His crate gives one dramatic wobble before he steps off and bows. A man in a damp tunic raises his hand and says, "If we're building a religion, I'd like to be in charge of holidays." What kind of holidays? Someone asks. The kind where we don't talk about politics or beans. More laughter. More nods. And as you lean back, feeling the cool stone cradle your spine and the quiet chatter ripple over you, it occurs to you, sacred doesn't have to mean solemn. Sometimes reverence is just taking something deeply human and treating it like it matters. The latrine is not beautiful. It is not glamorous. But it is enduring. And maybe, just maybe, that's holiness enough. The fig peelers have retreated. The sponge wavers gently in its trough. The girl's chant, still echoing faintly in the alcove, is slowly being replaced by a new kind of performance, storytelling. It begins with an older man. His toga is faded at the edges, and he sits with the posture of someone who's been on marble benches since Augustus was a boy. He doesn't stand or call attention to himself, he simply begins. "I once saw a senator lose his dignity right here," he says, voice low and smooth. "Came in ranting about grain prices, left without a belt." Heads turn. People lean in. A few smile, a few shush those still rustling olives. Sat in the middle bench, the old man continues. Didn't check the sponge. Took a seat like it was the curia itself. And halfway through his monologue about supply chains, he leaned too far, missed the edge, and he makes a delicate tumbling motion with his hand. His dignity made a hasty exit. The room breaks into soft, indulgent laughter. No mocking, just appreciation for the absurdity of fate. Here's your historical fact. Roman latrines, though public, were not without reputation. People remembered who sat where, who talked too much, and especially who suffered any mishap. Social status did not protect you from a slippery bench or an unexpected draft. The old man wipes his eyes. They say he avoided this latrine for 3 years after that. Sent a servant ahead to check the sponge angle from then on. Here's your quirky tidbit. There's some evidence that wealthier Romans employed personal assistants, even in the latrine. Some were tasked with carrying vinegar jars, others with offering reading material, or simply standing by to prevent seat incidents. Historians still argue, a nearby listener says, whether these stories were exaggerated for effect. But I say, if a man can't laugh at himself mid-evacuation, he has no business legislating public theater. Another chuckle ripples through the room. And now, the dam has broken. A woman on the far bench shares a tale about a soldier who mistook the sponge trough for a wine cooler. A scribe beside you recalls a poet who came in to write metaphors about rivers, only to discover that he was the punchline by the end of the evening. A wiry man with a nervous laugh tells of the time he accidentally insulted a minor magistrate while quoting Virgil, and then sat next to him for 40 very quiet minutes. Joke 1. You imagine a scroll titled Tales from the Trough, a latrine anthology. Joke 2. You wonder if gladiators had their own special toilet stories. He conquered the Colosseum, but not the lentils. Joke 3. You picture a dinner party where guests politely ask, "Have you heard the one about Publius and the lemon sponge?" You relax into the laughter. There's something different about it now, softer, more affectionate. These aren't just stories about bodily functions or social mishaps. They're reminders of how fragile, and how hilarious, dignity can be. The kind of stories that bind people together. Not through glory or conquest, but through the shared, humbling truth that everybody sits. You find yourself smiling. Not just at the tales, but at the fact that in a space designed for silence and shame in so many cultures, the Romans found a way to make room for humor, honesty, and a good-natured roast. You lean your head back. The stone is cool. The laughter fades into a gentle murmur, and the stories settle into your bones like warm bread. A gentle breeze flutters through the arched doorway, lifting the scent of warm vinegar and something that might be pine oil or wishful thinking. Outside, someone is whistling. Inside, the stories have finally subsided into a mellow hush, the kind that only follows a well-fed room full of people who've just remembered they all have embarrassing memories. You breathe in slowly, as another figure edges into the space. This man is younger, probably no more than 20, and he walks with the cautious confidence of a student who has read a lot and lived very little. He clutches a scroll like it's a shield, and his toga is just slightly too short. He sits, clears his throat. I've compiled a list, he announces, of the 12 most prominent sponge-handling philosophies of the late Republic. Someone giggles. Another person snorts softly and mumbles, "Oh no, not another taxonomy." But the student is undeterred. There is, he says, the Stoic sponge, used with discipline, always rinsed. Then the Epicurean, warmed beforehand, never reused. The Cynic sponge is optional, occasionally weaponized. The skeptic, well, they just hover. The room breaks into scattered laughter. Here's your historical fact. Roman philosophy was so pervasive that even daily tasks were filtered through it. Everything, from dining to bathing to parenting, had its own philosophical angle. This kind of playful taxonomizing was not unheard of. Romans loved classifications almost as much as they loved puns. The Platonist, the student continues, believes the sponge exists as a perfect form somewhere in the heavens. The Aristotelian demands a chart ranking absorption versus scrubbability. The Neoplatonist? They prefer to imagine the sponge but never touch it. Even the stern-faced Stoic from earlier can't help but crack a smile. I knew a Neoplatonist once, he says. He tried to dry off using only metaphors. Here's your quirky tidbit. In private letters and public lectures, Roman intellectuals often joked about bodily functions, sometimes to disarm, sometimes to humble, and sometimes just because they found it funny. Seneca himself made jokes about groaning stomachs in mid-speech, and Pliny described his bowel troubles with the same reverence he reserved for volcanoes. Historians still argue, the student says, reading from his scroll now, whether the prevalence of bodily humor in Roman writings was a reflection of cultural openness, or merely a literary tic developed out of boredom and beans. He rolls up the scroll and bows. Thank you. I'll be presenting my sponge hierarchy again in the Sabura next week. Someone yells, add the bureaucrat's sponge. Always dry, always late. Joke 1. You imagine the student hosting a lecture series, soaking in thought, cleanliness and consciousness in the early empire. Joke 2. You picture a toga with little embroidered sponges down the hem. Philosophy majors only. Joke 3. You wonder if one day, future historians will unearth his scroll and assume it was serious. The Epicureans are now debating which type of sponge pairs best with honeyed fig soap. A poet in the corner begins composing an ode to absorption, with a feathered quill and a twinkle in his eye. You lean your head against the wall again. It's smoother now, or maybe your skin's just gone numb. The student's list was silly, yes. But something about it rang true. This latrine has become more than stone and water. It's become a kind of catalog. A memory bank. A sponge-soaked salon of shared absurdity. And you, somehow, are right in the middle of it. You stretch your legs. The water trickles on. A fly lands, then departs with impeccable timing. And you think, not for the first time, that maybe the great truths of life don't happen in palaces or libraries or marble courts. Maybe they happen right here. Between a sponge and a smile. The breeze has shifted now, coming from deeper inside the complex. A sign that the bathhouse attendants have opened another chamber. Warm currents mix with cooler drafts, brushing your ankles with the sleepy softness of midday. The latrine has grown quieter, not silent but soothed, as if everyone inside has decided, almost simultaneously, to speak just a little softer. The Epicureans nibble slower. The Stoics lean in rather than lean back. And the girl who once hummed latrine chants now traces gentle loops on the stone bench with her fingertips, as if writing invisible verses to Cloacina herself. It's in this softened lull that a voice rises again, not theatrical, not academic. It's a gentle, older woman, her words floating like steam. I remember, she says, when my grandmother used to say, "Don't trust a man who rushes out of a toilet." A few curious chuckles follow. The woman continues, her tone like warmed oil. She believed that how someone leaves a space says more than how they enter it. If a man rushes, it means he left something behind. If he lingers, he respects the ritual. She always said, everyone's equal when they sit. But only the wise are patient when they stand. You blink slowly. Here's your historical fact. Roman women, though largely excluded from official political discourse, had deeply ingrained roles in the management of domestic wisdom. Much of the culture's practical knowledge about health, hygiene, and etiquette was passed down through female voices, mothers, grandmothers, midwives. What went unsaid in Senate scrolls was often said at home, in kitchens, and yes, even near latrines. The woman smiles gently. My grandmother used to bring her own sponge, too. Kept it in a little clay jar with oil and lavender. Said a clean end leads to a clean mind. A Stoic near the trough murmurs, she sounds like a true philosopher. She was, the woman says. Just not the kind who wrote things down. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Roman women did indeed carry personal hygiene items in small pouches, scented oils, cloths, and herbs. Lavender, rose, and myrtle were popular additions, often for masking smells or simply for the comfort of familiarity. While not all latrines were mixed gender, communal hygiene had its unspoken rituals, many of which, unsurprisingly, originated with women. Historians still argue, a nearby poet adds softly, whether the women who shaped household wisdom deserve the title philosopher. But I'd argue, if they solved more problems than they caused, that's enough. There's a long pause. Not awkward, just meaningful. Even the water hushes, just for a moment. Joke 1. You imagine a grandmotherly philosopher giving sponge cleaning advice like it's a sacred rite, always rinse toward the gods. Joke 2. You picture a new school of thought, pragmatic matronism. Balance the household, soften the soap, question all lentils. Joke 3. You wonder if there was ever a public scandal involving someone accidentally using a scented sponge and becoming too relaxed to leave. The Epicurean beside you sighs and says, honestly, I'd follow her into battle. Or into a bathhouse. Someone else adds, same thing, really? You close your eyes briefly. The scent of lavender lingers, if only in suggestion. There's something sacred in these memories, shared with the same reverence as an official edict. You open your eyes. The woman has settled back into her spot, smoothing the folds of her tunic with slow grace. She's not finished, you can tell. But she's waiting, for the room, and for you, to catch up. You let yourself soften, just a little more. And the latrine, stone, sponge, and memory, softens with you. The woman settles into silence again, like a candle snuffed without drama. Her words remain, though, echoing in the minds of those gathered, soft, wise, and somehow sturdier than all the scrolls combined. You sit with that a while. With her lavender sponge and her grandmother's warnings and the way a simple rule, don't rush out of a toilet, has suddenly become your new moral compass. But the latrine does what all great Roman venues do, it moves forward. The hush lifts. Someone shifts. Another clears their throat. And a new speaker, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a satchel of cracked wax tablets, rises to his feet with the air of a teacher who's wandered into the wrong classroom and decided to stay. I have, he announces, compiled an exhaustive list of notable Romans who met their end, directly or indirectly, via bad plumbing. A few people raise their eyebrows. He continues. It's longer than you'd think. Here's your historical fact. Roman plumbing was revolutionary, but not flawless. Aqueducts, sewers, and lead piping brought water to the masses, but also created unintended health hazards. Lead poisoning, still debated by historians as a factor in Rome's decline, was possibly spread through pipes and cookware. And blocked sewers often became sources of disease and minor catastrophes. The scribe pulls a cracked scroll from his satchel. Consider Marcus Tullius Ventus, he says. Slipped on a wet latrine floor and knocked himself unconscious. Drowned in 2 inches of rinse water. A gasp. A groan. The Epicureans wince in unison. Or Gaius Flavius Bibulus, he continues, who refused to share a sponge with a plebeian and was, within the hour, struck by falling roof tiles. Some say it was a warning from Cloacina. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Romans did believe that divine retribution could arrive in oddly specific forms: collapsing architecture, unexpected storms, or suspiciously fast food poisoning. Whether from gods or neighbors with grudges, misfortune had flair. Historians still argue, the scribe says, whether these deaths were truly cautionary tales or exaggerated gossip. But when your friend drowns beside a sponge, you don't forget. He rattles off a few more names. One man electrocuted by a thunderstone during a thunderstorm while relieving himself outdoors. Another who developed a fatal rash from poor vinegar hygiene. A woman who, fearing demons in the sewer, refused to sit for 3 days straight, and fainted in the forum. Each name draws a new wince, a new round of head-shaking, a new reason to think twice about bathroom confidence. Joke 1. You picture a Roman safety scroll titled What Not to Do with a Sponge. Joke 2. You imagine warning signs above latrines. Caution, floor may be holy or slippery. Joke 3. You think about starting a rumor that Cicero wore sponge sandals for protection. And through all of it, you begin to understand something. The latrine wasn't just a space for philosophy and politics. It was also, quite plainly, a space where people could meet their end, clumsily, ignobly, and with a soggy whimper. Death, like digestion, did not discriminate. The scribe concludes his list with a solemn nod. So next time you scoff at the vinegar jar or wrinkle your nose at sponge etiquette, remember Marcus Ventus, and tread carefully. He sits. The room exhales. A moment later, a voice calls from the back. You forgot Lucilla the Younger. She fell asleep mid-squat and dreamt herself into retirement. Laughter again. But softer now. Less absurd, more affectionate. You feel it, too, that delicate balance. Between humor and horror. Between mortality and the mundane. Because in Rome, even the public toilet could be a place of finality. You adjust your sandals. And take just a little more care with how you sit. The cautionary tales have left the room in a kind of thoughtful silence. Less grim, more gently respectful. Even the sponges seem still, as if pondering their delicate place in the ever-tilting balance between hygiene and hubris. You shift a bit more deliberately now, subtly adjusting the folds of your tunic and ensuring both feet are flat on the cool stone floor. No one wants to go the way of Marcus Ventus. The man with the scroll of toilet tragedies has rolled it up and tucked it away. He's sipping from a tiny clay flask, watered wine, perhaps, and looking pleased with himself, as only someone who's shared 17 latrine deaths can be. But before the room can sink too deep into sponge-related superstition, another figure rises. This one is old. Not just worn sandals old, but might have seen the Republic fall and gotten bored old. His beard is long enough to curl at the tips, and his eyes gleam like polished marble coins. No more death, he rasps, voice cracking like a warm loaf of bread. Let's talk about latrine art. There's a pause. A few confused glances. But the old man smiles. Yes. Art. You think these walls were always this dull? Here's your historical fact. Many Roman latrines, especially in bathhouses and wealthier homes, were decorated. Murals, mosaics, and even graffiti adorned the walls. Scenes ranged from mythological epics to cheeky cartoons, including gods relieving themselves, humorous slogans, and even helpful diagrams for first-time visitors. The old man gestures to a faded mosaic near the entrance. You hadn't noticed it before, partially hidden by shadow, partially ignored in the overall sponge-centric chaos. It's a simple design, a satyr relieving himself into a stylized stream, while a nearby nymph rolls her eyes. You see? The old man says. We were never meant to suffer here. We were meant to smile. Even while sitting. Here's your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found latrine graffiti with surprisingly modern flavor. Phrases like "I came here to relieve and reflect" and "best seat in Pompeii" appear scratched into stone. One particularly memorable scribble in Herculaneum simply reads, "I have seen worse forums than this toilet." Historians still argue, the man adds, whether these images and inscriptions were spontaneous jokes or part of a designed aesthetic. But I say, anything you carve while squatting is sacred. A young boy with charcoal and parchment starts sketching the satyr. A poet nearby starts composing a limerick. And the Epicureans? They're already debating whether the nymph is expressing moral disapproval or just indigestion. Joke 1. You imagine a Roman interior decorator saying, "Yes, we're thinking vulgar pastoral for this lavatory." Joke 2. You picture a high-ranking senator commissioning toilet frescoes titled "Virtue in Relief." Joke 3. You wonder how many young Romans tried to sneak their initials into mosaic tiles just for glory. A woman with a quiet voice but a confident gaze chimes in. In my village, we painted sea monsters on the walls of the bath latrines. Said it reminded people not to linger, especially when the tide was coming in. Another chimes in, we had verses from Homer. Not to elevate the mood, mind you. Just to remind people that even heroes need to go. You smile. The idea of latrines as places of art, not just function, but expression, sits nicely. It makes sense. Where else is the mind so free to wander? Where else does boredom meet stone and become poetry? You look around with fresh eyes. The walls have worn spots. Faint doodles. Finger-drawn swirls in old wax, perhaps never scrubbed off. Traces of laughter. Marks of past lives. And you realize that even here, someone found it worth adding color to the silence. As the conversation about latrine art fades into appreciative hums and squinting at faint wall doodles, a new voice slips into the room, light, uncertain, but oddly resonant. It belongs to a young man standing just beside the water trough, his hands damp and his tunic half-tucked like he came in to rinse, and somehow stayed to philosophize. Do you think, he says, hesitantly, that the latrine is the only place where we're truly honest? A murmur. He glances around, cheeks flushing a little. I mean, here, we don't posture. We don't pretend. We talk about mortality, politics, digestion. No one performs. No one, well, tries too hard. You lean forward, just slightly. Because, he's not wrong. Here's your historical fact. Roman latrines were among the few social spaces where class distinctions visibly blurred. Rich and poor alike used public facilities. Although elite citizens might have had private latrines in their villas, they often visited public ones when away from home, and in those moments, everyone sat side by side, tunics lifted, hierarchy paused. A Stoic nods from the corner. Philosophy is born when the stomach is settled and pride is softened. The Epicurean nearest you sips wine from a wide-lipped cup and adds, and humility enters most easily through the bowels. That gets a laugh, but a gentle one. The young man brightens. So what if this is the only place where real citizenship happens? Where we aren't roles, but just Romans. Here's your quirky tidbit. During certain festivals, especially Saturnalia, social roles were deliberately reversed. Slaves were served by their masters, children gave commands, and formal barriers dissolved. Some historians suggest these inversions echoed everyday moments like the public latrine, where pretense was stripped away, in more ways than one. Historians still argue, someone says, whether the dissolving of social order in shared spaces was empowering, or simply tolerated for convenience. But here, no one argues. Because the logic sits warm and still, like a stone bench under a late afternoon sun. Joke 1. You imagine a new Senate chamber built entirely like a latrine. Stone benches, constant flow, no hierarchy. Just truth, and excellent ventilation. Joke 2. You picture campaign slogans like he listens. He flushes. He represents. Joke 3. You consider adding honest conversations while seated to the Roman concept of virtus. The young man sits. Not dramatically. Not triumphantly. Just comfortably. A philosopher beside him gives a slow nod. You've said more in 2 breaths than I've managed in 40 years. That's the only praise he receives. But he glows, like he's just delivered a speech on the Senate floor, and in a way, maybe he has. You settle back again, feeling the cool stone hug your shoulders. The flow of conversation slows once more, everyone thinking now, not just talking. Eyes half-lidded. Scrolls loosely held. A scribe doodling a diagram of emotional honesty preceding angle. This is more than comfort. This is communion. Not the sacred kind with incense and priests, but the quieter, older kind. The kind built from shared spaces and relaxed bodies and words spoken not to impress, but to understand. And here, of all places, in the echo of running water, in the shadow of sponge troughs, it finally feels safe to simply be. A long stretch of silence now drapes itself across the latrine like a well-worn cloak. Not awkward, just thoughtful. People lean back, let their shoulders drop, breathe in that peculiar blend of warm stone, vinegar, and humanity. The young man's words hang in the air like mist, where we aren't roles, but just Romans. And somehow, no one wants to speak right away. The Epicureans sip more slowly. The Stoics close their eyes. The poets begin composing in their heads, perhaps, but even they don't reach for their wax tablets just yet. Eventually, a man with a weathered face and a sandal strap that's definitely seen better days speaks up, not loud, not proud. Just curious. Do you think, he says, we come here to be forgotten? Or to be remembered? That gets a few blinking glances. He shrugs. All this talk about honesty and sacred benches. But when we're gone, will anyone know we sat here? A new kind of stillness takes hold, one that makes you sit up just a little straighter. Here's your historical fact. Roman tomb inscriptions often listed not just names and accomplishments, but professions and even minor anecdotes. One gravestone for a publican included a carving of a sponge on a stick, perhaps an in-joke, perhaps a legacy. Death didn't erase the mundane, it often carved it in stone. Another voice chimes in, older and dry like papyrus. There was a man in Pompeii who wrote his name into the latrine wall. Just his name. No title, no boast. Just, I was here. Here's your quirky tidbit. Graffiti found in Roman latrines ranges from rude jokes to poetic fragments to simple statements of presence. Some inscriptions include phrases like Felix passed water here, or Claudia thought deeply here. Some even left messages to imaginary readers, little echoes across time. Historians still argue, someone mutters, whether those scribbles were acts of ego or attempts at immortality. You gaze across the room. The mosaic of the satyr and nymph. The barely visible scroll sketches. The whisper of names no one says aloud. All these little echoes. And suddenly it's clear, the latrine wasn't just a place for endings. It was a space for small legacies. Joke 1. You imagine someone 1,000 years from now carefully translating a wall message that says, "Titus farted here." Joke 2. You picture a young Roman agonizing over which font to scratch his graffiti in, classic chisel or something edgier. Joke 3. You consider carving something clever yourself, then decide your presence is already imprinted. Warm bench, shared silence, honest breath. Maybe, says the sandal man, being remembered isn't about statues or scrolls. Maybe it's enough that someone shared a joke with you, or nodded when you said something true. A woman near the trough smiles faintly. Or remembered that you always warmed the sponge for others. You close your eyes. Not to sleep, yet, but to better listen. To better feel the way the room holds you. To imagine that maybe, just maybe, when you rise from this bench, a little warmth will linger behind. Not for legacy, but for comfort. Because you were here. And that was enough. The hush remains, but it's no longer empty, it hums. Like the resonance of a plucked lyre string still trembling in the air. Around you, the others seem to feel it too. Not a single scroll rustles. No olives roll. Even the sponge trough trickles with something like reverence. And then, from somewhere near the back wall, a small, dry cough breaks the quiet. "I've kept silent long enough," says a voice, thin but sharp as a reed whistle. All eyes turn. The speaker is a man swaddled in layers of patched wool and dignity, his face all corners and creases. A philosopher, you think, though more of the self-taught variety. His sandals don't match, and one of them has the unmistakable bulge of a secret snack tucked inside. "I have a theory," he declares, "about why people speak most freely in latrines." He pauses dramatically. Several people lean in. "It's because we are, at last, in full agreement with our bodies." There's a beat of silence. Then a collective huh. He continues. "In public we posture. In the Senate we puff our chests. At the market we haggle and flatter and jostle. But here? Here we sit. We let go. We surrender." Here's your historical fact. Ancient Roman culture placed immense value on bodily control and poise, especially in public. But places like the bathhouse and the latrine were rare zones where such expectations relaxed. Philosophers from Seneca to Epictetus acknowledged the absurdity of pretending to be statues when all men still had to visit the sponge. "We talk truth," the man says, "because we've accepted our digestion. You cannot lie when your insides are honest." Murmurs of agreement ripple through the room like a soft breeze. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Roman physicians believed emotional imbalances were linked to bowel irregularities. A cheerful disposition meant good gut health. A bitter tongue? Likely constipation. It was not uncommon for doctors to prescribe both conversation and herbs as remedies. Historians still argue, the speaker goes on, whether the latrine's intimacy was social or anatomical. But I say, when your belly speaks, your tongue follows. Joke 1. You imagine a philosopher's clinic, prescribing debates instead of pills, arguing that flatulence is just suppressed rhetoric. Joke 2. You picture a new school of thought, digestivism. Know thy gut, know thyself. Joke 3. You consider writing a self-help scroll titled "Think Like a Sponge, Absorb What You Need, Rinse What You Don't." The man finally sits down again, slow and steady, like a marble statue deciding to nap. A woman claps once. A few others follow, softly, until the room once again melts into quiet delight. And now the words swirl in the steam around you: honesty, surrender, agreement with the body. You stretch your legs. Shift your weight. You feel aligned. Not just with the stone, or the trough, or the sponge, but with yourself. With the simple, wonderful fact of being human. You exist. You digest. You speak. You sit. And none of it is beneath you. The old philosopher's theory lingers like steam from a still warm bath, impossible to hold, yet oddly grounding. Around you, a few people nod, others simply rest their chins on their palms and gaze toward the open doorway, where golden afternoon light now slices across the floor like a lazy sundial. You can feel it too, the slowing of everything. Not just time, but thought. a soft coasting towards stillness. And yet, the room isn't finished. A boy, barely old enough to wear a tunic without tripping, stands up from the far end of the bench. He holds something clutched in his small hands, a crude clay tablet, smeared with what is either wax or jam. He lifts it and says proudly, "I wrote a poem." A pause. And then, as if by ancient law, the room adjusts its posture, leans in, and listens. The boy clears his throat. There once was a sponge in a trough, who hated to scrub someone's cough. He said, "It's unfair," with a vinegar stare, and rolled down the bench in a huff. A beat of silence. Then thunderous, joyful laughter. The boy beams, cheeks red, tablet raised like a laurel crown. Here's your historical fact. Roman children, especially those from literate families, were encouraged to write simple poetry and rhymes from a young age. Some even scratched verses into walls or clay tiles, often bathroom humor, because some things truly never change. The Epicureans cheer. The Stoics clap with restraint but sincerity. The woman who told the story of her grandmother wipes an eye and says, "That sponge had standards." Here's your quirky tidbit. In Pompeii, archaeologists discovered short poems and riddles etched into the plaster of latrines and bathhouses. Many were surprisingly witty, and at least one involved a love affair between two sponges named Softius and Scrubba. Historians still argue, an elderly scribe says with mock seriousness, whether these poems were genuine self-expression or just early graffiti. But clearly, the tradition lives on. Joke 1. You picture a Roman poetry contest held exclusively in latrines. Winner gets a sponge upgrade. Joke 2. You imagine Softius and Scrubba getting their own epic, the Aeneid, but for absorbency. Joke 3. You think maybe you'll write a poem too, just a quiet one, left carved beneath your bench for someone centuries from now to find and smile at. The boy sits, tablet still clutched in his hands like treasure. The room settles again. The light from the doorway now pools gently over the central drain, painting it gold. Someone begins to hum, a low, tuneless hum, not quite music, but just enough to keep the silence from getting lonely. And it strikes you. This whole day, this gathering of philosophers, jokers, poets, and strangers, has been a kind of poem. A living verse. Each voice a line. Each silence a breath. You smile, tuck your hands into your sleeves, and exhale. The poem continues. Even in stillness. The hum carries on, soft and low, like a lullaby the latrine has always known but rarely sung aloud. It mingles with the distant trickle of water, and the occasional clink of a clay cup or sandal strap. By now, the room is almost dreamlike, muted voices, slow movements, and the warm exhale of a sun just beginning to slide behind terracotta rooftops. You've lost track of time, and that feels right. No one seems in a hurry to leave. Not even the ones who finished their business hours ago. The latrine has transformed, from a place of routine relief into a quiet sanctuary of laughter, philosophy, and accidental poetry. And now, a final voice rises. A woman near the far end. Her hair is gray, not with age exactly, but with the kind of wisdom that grows when someone's seen too many triumphs to take them seriously. I've been thinking, she begins, not as a performance, but more like a soft ripple of thought. About how we talk in here. About all the words left behind, carved, spoken, shared. She traces her finger along the edge of the stone bench. What if, she continues, the latrine is the last place where language belongs to everyone? Here's your historical fact. In ancient Rome, literacy was more widespread than in many other ancient cultures. Graffiti, public inscriptions, and everyday signage created a kind of public discourse available to more than just the elite. Public spaces, including latrines, often bore the most democratic expressions of thought, unfiltered, unedited, and absolutely honest. A murmur of agreement spreads through the room. Here, she says, no one edits your scroll. No one censors your punchline. No one charges you to recite your rhymes. You speak, and someone listens, even if it's just a sponge. Here's your quirky tidbit. In several preserved Roman latrines, messages were scratched directly into the plaster in casual handwriting, everything from love declarations to complaints about sponge theft. Some included brief one-liners like "I waited too long," or "The gods bless whoever invented this bench." Historians still argue, she adds, whether these messages were personal or performative. But I think they were both. We write because we need to remember, and because we hope someone, someday, will read. You glance toward the mosaic again. The satyr still relieves himself with wild abandon. The nymph still rolls her eyes. And maybe, just maybe, they're still watching. Still listening. Joke 1. You imagine a deity of grammar haunting Roman toilets, correcting graffiti with red chalk. Joke 2. You picture sponge critics arguing over proper poetic meter. Too many trochees, not enough iambs. Joke 3. You briefly consider starting a latrine-based literary society, the Order of the Whispering Trough. The woman finishes simply. We don't leave statues behind. We leave scribbles. Smudges. Warm seats. That's enough. The boy with the poem smiles at her like he's found a grandmother he didn't know he needed. Someone finally rises. Stretches. Collects the satchel. Nods farewell. Then another. A few more. You don't rush. No one does. The door remains open, the breeze still sweet. And you think, this latrine has been a library? A lecture hall? A comedy stage? A temple? A home? And now, it's gently falling asleep. So you stay for just a little while longer. The stone beneath you is warm, and the light that once danced across the floor has softened to amber. Outside, the world continues. Carts rumble, birds flutter, bakers shout. But in here, time has curled up like a contented cat. The room breathes with the memory of voices, of thoughts shared freely and foolishly and beautifully. There are no debates left to win, no scrolls left to unroll. Just the gentle knowledge that something happened here, something real, something soft, something wonderfully human. You rest your back against the wall and let your eyelids drift low. Maybe you'll rise in a moment. Maybe not. There's no rush. No one waiting. No senator glaring, no toga to straighten. Only the hush. Only the trickle. Only the sponge, and the breeze, and the quiet understanding that here, in this strange and humble place, you were seen. You were heard. You were part of something. A murmur. A joke. A story. A sigh. Now let it all drift away like steam from a hot spring. Let the benches fade, the mosaic blur, the chatter dissolve into stillness. Let your breath slow. Your thoughts soften. Your shoulders melt into stone. And if you sleep now, well, you'll be in excellent company. Wait, it's not over yet. A pause stretches, quiet but weighty, as if even the stone itself is waiting. No one speaks. Not because they've run out of words, but because the room, this strange, vinegar-scented sanctuary, has reached a kind of breathless equilibrium. Thoughts swirl gently, like steam rising from forgotten oil on bathhouse tiles. Then, a shuffle of wool. A slow, deliberate settling. And the old man, he's been there the whole time, half-shadowed, half asleep, adjusts his cloak with the care of someone about to say something that matters. A throat clears. Not out of annoyance, but invitation. I have a theory, the old man repeats, settling deeper into his woven cloak. About why people speak most freely in latrines. He pauses again, not from drama now, but from genuine effort. His breath whistles faintly through his nose, like wind brushing over a flute hole. The group leans forward as if afraid the air might take his thought before his voice does. It's because we are all, he continues slowly, already letting go. A beat of silence follows. Not awkward. Just full. Then, the Stoic in the corner nods once. The Epicurean raises an approving figure. Even the skeptical scribe lowers his stylus. There is no mask here, the old man adds. No shield. You cannot hold your breath forever in a room like this. Truth must pass, as surely as everything else does. Scattered laughter. The kind that comes not from hilarity, but agreement. He isn't finished. In the baths, we pretend to cleanse our sins with scented oils. In the Senate, we puff ourselves up with honeyed words and moral rhetoric. But here? He taps the stone beside him, one curled finger on the bench. Here, we are animal. Still, thinking, but stripped of delusion. A woman near the trough, the one who hummed earlier, says quietly, "Then perhaps we should legislate from here." A murmur of approval stirs. Someone jokingly raises a hand. All in favor of replacing the curia with a sponge bench? The old man grins, though it's more memory than mischief. "I once served a magistrate who made every big decision here. Said clarity came easier with a cold seat beneath him and vinegar in the air." Here's your historical fact. Roman administrators, especially in smaller municipalities, were known to conduct both personal and minor civic matters while in latrines. There are accounts of legal disputes being discussed, contracts reviewed, and even family feuds resolved mid-squat. It was part necessity, part cultural ease. The Epicurean with the wine flask nods, swirling the last mouthful thoughtfully. "It's true. My uncle brokered a grain deal here once. Said the smell kept him honest." Another chuckle. Even the philosopher who usually scowled at jokes gives a tight-lipped smile. Here's your quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes referred to latrines with euphemisms like the Whispering Wall or the Stone Council. Not to conceal their purpose, but to celebrate the strange intimacy and honesty they fostered. Some graffiti even makes fun of counsel delivered mid-relief. The old man leans forward, voice lower now. "Do you know what I think the real miracle of this place is?" The room holds its breath. "It's that we let each other speak." He gestures broadly, not at the philosophers, but at everyone. The quiet fishmonger listening near the wall. The young student whose scroll remains open but blank. The grandmother with the lavender sponge and the calm eyes. No rank here. No order. No senator speaking over the butcher. No priest silencing the dancer. Everyone listens. Not because we have to, but because in the sound of running water and shared exposure, it would be rude not to. You feel something in your chest shift. Here, among strangers and sponges, the rules dissolve not into chaos, but into respect. The woman from earlier, the one who spoke of her grandmother, lifts her chin slightly. "I think," she says softly, "that this may be the only place in Rome where the soul doesn't need armor." A long pause follows. Not silence, just space. The kind that comes when something's been said that no one wants to rush past. And then, as if to break the spell gently, the scribe mutters, "I should have brought a longer scroll." Joke 1. You imagine a Roman child being scolded not for speaking out of turn, but for not speaking during the Latrine Symposium. Joke 2. You wonder if orators practice their Senate speeches here first. If it echoes well here, it'll echo well anywhere. Joke 3. You picture the gods of Olympus leaning down, curious and a bit confused. Wait, they're telling the truth. While sitting? The Epicurean clears his throat. "If I may." He wipes his fingers, then stands. "I would like to propose something unusual," he says. "A rule. One we follow nowhere else in Rome." He waits until even the pigeons outside seem to stop flapping. Whoever enters this place, whatever their station, must leave it having spoken one truth, and heard one truth. Soft gasps. Nods. No masks. No rehearsals. Just a single honest thing. About life, about themselves, about anything. The scribe lifts his stylus. "Do farts count?" The Epicurean bows slightly. "Only the ones that teach." Here's your historical fact. Certain Roman mystery cults required initiates to confess a truth in private, unadorned spaces. These weren't always temples, sometimes caves, cellars, or even baths. The idea was the same: vulnerability makes room for honesty. The Epicurean looks around. Let it be called lex cloacina, the law of the latrine. Everyone claps. Not loud. Not ironic. Just real. You look around. The cracked stone. The fading mosaic. The vinegar smell. The sponge, resting like a philosopher's staff in its trough. You nod. This place isn't just about relief anymore. It's about remembrance. Not of names or victories, but of truths. Spoken softly. Seated humbly. And now, as the next speaker begins, a woman with her tunic rolled to her knees and eyes like carved bronze, you lean back again. Not because you're done, but because you are ready to listen. She speaks without standing. Her voice is low but carries, like wind through reed fields at dusk, slow, warm, and threaded with a rhythm that makes even the Epicureans quiet their olives. I've heard, she says, eyes scanning the semicircle, many truths in this room. Some clever. Some kind. Some loud enough to echo all the way to the Sibera. A few chuckles. But there's one truth, she continues, that no one has spoken. Not directly. And maybe that's because it doesn't sit easily. Not on stone, not in the belly. She pauses. We are all a little afraid of being forgotten. The room stills again. Even the sponge trough, babbling until now, seems to hush. She adjusts her tunic slightly, as if bracing herself. When my father died, I washed his hands. He was a potter. His fingers were bent, callous, cracked. He hadn't held a stylus since boyhood. But I remember thinking, this man shaped the world around him. Bowls. Lamps. Jars. Yet nothing with his name on it. She lets that linger. His neighbors didn't remember what he said. Only what he made. And even that? Shattered eventually. Someone near the back whispers, but what does that have to do with the latrine? She smiles, but it's not condescending. Just tired. This room, this space, it remembers more than any temple. Here, we carve jokes and wisdom into walls. We share ideas, pass sponges, speak plainly. And sometimes, we leave pieces of ourselves that last longer than any amphora. Here's your historical fact. Roman artisans, unless commissioned by nobility, were rarely credited for their work. Most remained anonymous, even when their pottery or masonry lasted centuries. But graffiti in shared spaces, like latrines, offered them a chance to write their names, thoughts, even critiques of the elite. These inscriptions are now among the only remaining records of their voices. The woman with bronze eyes nods toward the wall. I've read those scratchings. Crude drawings. Sentences half finished. Names scrawled in frustration or joy or boredom. They aren't great literature. But they're real. And they outlasted their authors. She looks directly at the young scribe, whose stylus hovers midair. You write a list of sponge-related deaths. Fine. But someday, someone will read it. Not because of the sponge, but because it was yours. The scribe looks like he's just been knighted by vinegar. Here's your quirky tidbit. In Pompeii, archaeologists found graffiti that read Successus was here, on the 15th day before the calends. He did well. No one knows who Successus was. But now everyone does. That's the strange permanence of impermanent spaces. The woman's voice softens again. I bring my daughter here sometimes. She's small. She doesn't understand philosophy yet. But I tell her, when you sit here, you listen. When you leave gently. And if you have something to say it where it matters. A pause. Then, this matters. She touches the bench. Just once. Not like it's a throne. But like it's sacred. Historians still argue, she adds, whether graffiti is vandalism or testimony. I say it's a little of both. A mess that tells the truth. A slow clap begins, not raucous, but reverent. Others join in. The woman simply nods and leans back, as if the weight of what she carried has finally shifted. Joke 1. You imagine a Roman scholar centuries from now discovering a latrine carving and citing it in an academic paper titled On the Digestive Democracy of Empire. Joke 2. You picture a child being scolded, don't you dare write poetry in the forum. Go to the toilet like a proper thinker. Joke 3. You wonder how many philosophical movements began not with scrolls, but with someone scratching what if beans are the answer. Into a toilet wall. The Epicureans offer the woman dried figs in gratitude. The Stoic bows slightly. Even the quiet grandmother lets out a soft, approving sigh. And as the warmth from her words lingers like the scent of old pine oil, you begin to understand something. Legacy isn't what lasts forever. It's what someone remembers long enough to smile. You scan the graffiti closest to you again. Among the nonsense and symbols and anatomical jokes, there's a name. Faint. Almost erased. Marcia. I was tired. I still am. Nothing more. But it's enough. She existed. She left something behind. And that, perhaps, is the truest tribute a latrine can give. You lean back, the stone no warmer, but no longer cold. You close your eyes. And listen. To the slow, sacred hum of people telling the truth. One sponge at a time. The room breathes again, deeper now, like lungs finally learning they don't have to hold anything in. People shift, soft, unhurried, like they're moving not just their bodies, but their perspectives. The woman with bronze eyes has folded her hands in her lap and stares calmly at the sponge trough, as if expecting it to hum a reply. The scribe, seated across from her, is already scribbling furiously. Not with the sharp, jerky movements of a man recording names or data, but with that rare, round handwriting reserved for truth. And then someone asks softly, "But what of names?" The question comes from a figure near the archway. A young woman, cloaked in travel dust and wearing sandals that look more like stitched ambition than comfort. She holds no scroll. Her hair is bound in a utilitarian twist. She's clearly not local, but there's something familiar in her voice. She steps forward. We've spoken of honesty, of humility, of being seen. She taps the edge of the nearest bench with her fingers. But what of being named? This room, these walls, they carry fragments. But most are nameless. No one interrupts. She nods. My mother was a baker. My father, a mule handler. I don't know if they ever carved their names anywhere. If they did, time scraped them off. She sits slowly, half participant, half inquisitor. I came here, she says, hoping someone would remember them. But now, I think maybe remembering is something we choose to do. Here's your historical fact. Romans were particular about names. A citizen's tria nomina, 3 names, reflected lineage, status, and citizenship. But those without full rights, like women, foreigners, and slaves, often went by a single name or a nickname. Their contributions to society were often preserved only in second-hand records, or graffiti. The Stoic lifts his head. A name, he murmurs, is a basket. It only holds meaning if someone fills it. The Epicurean raises a cup. And if no one does, it still exists, floating, empty, but possible. The traveler nods. Then let's fill them. She pulls a bit of charcoal from the pouch at her hip, walks to the nearest blank patch of wall, and carefully begins to write. Livia and Tarsus made bread, carried burdens, and loved figs. They were kind. They mattered. She steps back. It's not elegant. Not poetic. But it is permanent enough for now. Someone claps. Someone else begins to weep, quietly. You glance toward the woman with bronze eyes. She smiles at the wall, then at the traveler, and says only, "Thank you." Here's your quirky tidbit. Roman tombstones and wall graffiti often featured phrases like "he was good," "she was kind," "they were missed." These brief lines, carved by those without power or legacy, are some of the most enduring human notes in ancient history. Historians still argue, says a man with a broken sandal strap, whether remembrance is for the dead, or for the living who fear becoming them. You shift on the bench, the cold now distant, almost irrelevant. Your eye traces the line of sponge handles and you wonder how many hands, named or unnamed, have lifted them, laughed over them, lived around them. Joke 1. You imagine future Romans developing sponge handles engraved with the names of their users. Property of Gaius. Do not dab without consent. Joke 2. You picture an enterprising latrine artist opening a booth. Name yourself in stone for 2 denarii. 3. If you want a poetic flourish. Joke 3. You wonder if somewhere, in a fancier toilet across town, someone's carving "I was somebody's servant. I was also someone." The atmosphere shifts again, not dramatically, but gently, like a ripple caused by a fig falling into water. More people rise. Not to speak, but to write. Small phrases. Names. Moments. One man draws a cracked amphora and underneath writes, "I was useful." Once. A child, with charcoal smudges across her knuckles, scrawls, "My dog farted louder than my father." We laughed. It was a good day. The poet in the corner wipes his eyes. Not dramatically. Just enough. You lean forward, compelled, and press your own fingers against a blank patch of stone. You hesitate. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you realize this moment matters. You scrawl. I listened. I laughed. I was part of something. Then sit back. And breathe. This isn't a monument. It's not a chapel. It's not even a museum. It's a mosaic of moments. Lives. Honesty on tap. A gallery made of echo and sponge. You turn your head, and just before the next speaker rises, you catch sight of the young man who began it all. His eyes wide as he watches name after name appear on the walls like ghostly flowers in stone. He whispers, almost too quietly to hear, "They'll remember us." And you know, yes, they will. Not because of greatness, but because you dared to write. A hush still clings to the air like olive oil on rough cloth, fragrant, sticky, lingering. It's the kind of silence that feels earned, not enforced. Around the chamber, names continue to bloom across the walls, etched in charcoal, nail scratches, or, when tools run out, fingertips dipped in a mix of dust and water. A kind of map is forming. That's when the cartographer arrives. He slips in unnoticed at first. No grand entrance, no sandals slap against stone. Just a man in a soot-gray tunic carrying a scroll case that looks more patched than whole. His eyes are the kind that scan, not in judgment, but in measurement. He sees things and stores them. Quietly. With purpose. Without speaking, he lowers himself onto the corner of a bench, pulls open his case, and reveals a map. Not of Rome, but of the latrine. Detailed. Annotated. Beautiful. He rolls it out across his lap, smooths the edges with careful fingers, and then holds it up, just high enough for those nearby to see. A ripple of curiosity spreads. You lean forward. The map is a masterwork, not because of its artistry, though it is finely inked, but because of its intent. Every bench is labeled. Every sponge trough. Every crack in the mosaic. There's even a small notation near the entrance. Beware the third tile, it wobbles. Then, in tiny, careful script along the bottom, here they spoke. Here they laughed. Here they remembered. A woman near the center gasps softly. "You drew this?" The man nods. Every mark. Every whisper I could catch. I've sat here many afternoons. Listening. Measuring. Another asks, "But why?" He unrolls the bottom of the scroll further and reveals dozens of miniature names, some legible, others no more than initials. Under each, a note, told a joke, spoke of her father, cried and didn't apologize, left a scroll of bad poetry, kept anyway. "I am a cartographer," he says, voice dry but not cold. "Not of cities. Of moments. Here's your historical fact. While most surviving Roman maps were military or civic in nature, some scholars believe that artists and amateur chroniclers created memory maps, drawings of personal spaces annotated with recollections. Bathhouses, marketplaces, and yes, even latrines, may have been quietly documented this way by those who saw value in the everyday. The cartographer taps a tiny square etched near the mosaic of the satyr and nymph. That woman, he nods toward the speaker with bronze eyes, changed how this room speaks. Her story is part of the layout now. He then points to another mark, near the sponge trough, where the girl hummed earlier. This is where the first chant was heard. I marked it as a place of softness. The young traveler from earlier whispers, this is a different kind of memory. The man inclines his head. Maps are just stories that refuse to forget. Here's your quirky tidbit. In certain rural Roman traditions, places where emotional events occurred, births, deaths, revelations, were marked with small symbols in household ledgers or scratched into door frames. It wasn't superstition. It was sentiment. Historians still argue, says the scribe, leaning in, whether private memory is worth preserving. Whether a quiet truth told on a bench is as valuable as a speech in the forum. The cartographer doesn't look up. It is, he replies. It's just harder to see. You gaze at the map again. At the soft sweep of lines tracing stone benches. At the dotted annotations, fig tray fell here. Laughter followed. Or Stoic paused. Then smiled. And you realize, this isn't just a record. It's a testament. Joke 1. You imagine the emperor commissioning a new imperial map of Rome, only to discover an appendix titled Bathrooms of Philosophical Significance. Joke 2. You picture a street vendor shouting, "Get your latrine maps here!" Only the truest toilets and most honest acoustics marked. Joke 3. You wonder if the gods, watching from above, are drawing maps of their own. Here, a man admitted fault. Here, a child sang for no reason. Here they mattered. The cartographer finishes rolling up the scroll and gently places it beside him. I'll return, he says. Maps must be updated. Stories keep growing. Someone calls after him, "What's the name of your work?" He smiles faintly. Lavcrum Veritas. The Bath of Truth. You let that settle. Then, you reach into your own satchel, empty but for a half-broken stylus, and scratch a tiny circle on the bench beside your thigh. No words. Just a mark. Your mark. Because now you understand, memory is a geography of emotion. And the latrine? Is Rome's most honest map. The cartographer's departure leaves behind a silence, still and stirred, like a pond after a stone. No one moves to fill it with speeches or jokes. Instead, people glance at the walls, at the floor beneath their sandals, and, more tellingly, at one another. Something has shifted. This isn't just a space for relief anymore. It has become a repository. Of echoes. Of choices. Of the small, stubborn truths that refuse to be forgotten. And then the boy speaks. Not loudly. Not for attention. But with that clear, earnest tone that only the very young, or the very certain, can manage. May I collect the stories? He stands awkwardly at the edge of the sponge trough, a small wax tablet clutched to his chest, a stylus tucked behind his ear. His tunic hangs crooked, one sandal strap half untied. He's maybe 12, maybe younger. But there's something steady in his hands, as if holding history was easier than holding himself. I've listened for weeks, he says. I don't always understand. But I remember things. The Stoic leans forward. What kind of things? The boy lifts the tablet. The joke about Cloacina and the overripe sponge. The woman who hums while thinking. The sound of the Epicurean pouring wine too fast. Laughter rolls across the room, not at him, but around him, like a tide parting to let him step forward. You've been recording us? Someone asks, half grinning. The boy nods. Not everything. Just what felt real. He walks carefully to the center of the room and places the tablet on the floor with a reverence reserved for altars or family recipes. I want to keep the things people say here. Not like a senator's speech. Just like a garden. One you can walk through when the world outside is loud. Here's your historical fact. Roman children, especially those apprenticed to scribes or scholars, often trained by observing public spaces. While their primary duties involved copying texts, many were encouraged to eavesdrop in markets, baths, and forums to develop a sense for language, cadence, and truth in tone. Some fragments of juvenile chronicles survive on wax tablets, mostly anecdotes, jokes, and overheard debates. The boy kneels beside the tablet, stylus ready. If anyone wants to tell me something, I'll write it down. He pauses. Then adds, almost embarrassed, only the good parts. Not the smells. The room chuckles again, soft, approving. The woman with bronze eyes leans over. Do you know what you are? He shakes his head. She smiles. You're an echo keeper. A whisper from the back adds, a scribe of soul. Even the Epicurean, usually quick with a joke, sits in respectful silence. The boy scribbles that too. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some ancient Roman families kept household books, not ledgers or inventories, but memory scrolls. Written by the youngest literate members, they often included family sayings, overheard advice, odd dreams, and community gossip. These documents weren't official, but they were treasured. Oral history turned into charcoal lines. The scribe calls out, "Do you plan to publish it?" The boy shrugs. "No. Just remember it. Maybe share it with my sister. Or write it on the back of the door when I'm older." Historians still argue, a philosopher mumbles, whether memory or ink lasts longer. The boy answers, not missing a beat, depends where you store them. Joke 1. You imagine the boy becoming Rome's most celebrated historian, not for wars or emperors, but for writing the people who sat honestly. Joke 2. You picture him opening a reading house called Latrine Librarium, free figs with every scroll. Joke 3. You wonder if someday, future scholars will discover his tiny wax tablet and argue over whether Epicurean snort was a joke, a ritual, or a form of minor rebellion. People begin approaching him, one by one, like offerings at a small temple. A baker shares a line her mother used to say about rising dough and rising tempers. A retired soldier recalls the exact smell of the forum during a rainstorm, and how it made him miss battle less. A young girl tells him the names of all her dolls, even the headless one, because they might be lonely if no one remembers. And he writes, with care, with slowness, as if every syllable might be read again, centuries from now, in a world where stone benches are glass, and sponge troughs are stories. You don't approach him yet. But you think, what would you say? What would you want etched, not in marble, but in wax and breath and childhood ink? You look around. You remember. You breathe. And you realize, this isn't just a latrine. It's an archive of the unspoken. The boy scratches another line. The sponge drips softly. And Rome, somehow, feels a little more remembered. Afternoon light now stretches long and golden across the stone floor, glinting off water and catching the pale dust that dances like memory itself. The latrine has quieted, not from exhaustion, but from fulfillment. Like a stomach well fed, or a scroll finally finished. The boy still scribbles gently. The cartographer's scroll rests nearby, rolled but not forgotten. And around the room, people sit differently now, not braced or fidgeting, but settled. As if the benches had somehow softened beneath them. Then someone clears their throat. An old voice. Familiar now. The grandmother. She stands, not straight, but steady. Her lavender-scented cloth is folded neatly on her lap. She doesn't wave her hands or pause for drama. She simply begins. I've been coming here, she says, since before the aqueduct near Aventine was rebuilt. That's longer than most of you have been alive. I've seen this latrine in winter, when the water turned sluggish and the benches steamed with morning breath. And I've seen it during festivals, when the lines stretched out the door and children pretended the sponge was a sword. Chuckles. She smiles, but her eyes stay sharp. And through all that, one thing never changed. Not the marble. Not the smell. Not even the cracked tile by the mosaic dolphin. She points to it. Everyone looks. It's the listening. A pause. This place, she continues, taught me how to listen. Not to argue or to reply, but to hear. There's no greater gift you can give a person than your silence while they speak. She gestures around. We've done that today. For each other. With grace. With humor. With a kind of dignity that even the Senate would envy, if they knew where to find it. Here's your historical fact. Ancient Romans held speech and oration in sacred regard, but active listening was often the mark of wisdom in private discourse. Philosophical schools trained students not just to debate, but to sit silently and reflect. In informal settings like baths or latrines, this practice took root in quieter, more honest ways. She sits back down, hands in her lap. But her words remain. And that's when the Epicurean, yes, that one, stands with a slice of fig poised like a torch. I propose, he says, a festival. A few raised eyebrows. One curious grunt. A new one. One not for the gods or the dead or for wheat or for conquest. One for this. He spins slowly. A festival for the ordinary. For the thinkers on stone seats. For the sponge wielders and the truth tellers. Someone calls out, "What would you call it?" He grins. Clarity Day. Laughter, yes. But also applause. The poet in the corner raises a stylus. We'd need verses. The baker offers bread. And warm crusts. The child with the headless doll says, and songs. About names. The Stoic clears his throat. And moments of silence. Between thoughts. Here's your quirky tidbit. Rome had countless minor festivals, many hyperlocal, some entirely invented by neighborhoods or guilds. Some were only celebrated in a single street, or bathhouse, or corner of a forum. They might involve a shared meal, a short play, or even just a day where people greeted each other in a particular way. Historians still argue, murmurs ascribed near the trough, whether these micro-celebrations had meaning. But I say, if people marked the day, the meaning came. You smile. Because now you understand, Clarity Day isn't about gods. It's about us. You. Them. The laughter that loops back into silence. The truth that lingers even after the speaker rises and pulls their tunic straight. Joke 1. You imagine a merchant offering festival of clarity oil blends, one drop, and your mind will empty faster than your bowels. Joke 2. You picture a town crier announcing, all citizens are invited to sit, reflect, and evacuate, intellectually. Joke 3. You wonder if Clarity Day will one day replace Saturnalia, and honestly, you'd be okay with that. As the sun begins to fade, golden rays slipping off the tile and leaving behind only shadow and warmth, people begin to stand. Slowly. Thoughtfully. No rush. A few touch the wall once more. A few say nothing at all. You don't move yet. You look at the sponge. At the graffiti. At the water, still running, whispering stories even when no one's listening. Then you reach for your own bit of wall and carve one last line. I sat. I listened. I left softer. And that's it. No monument will be built. No senator will quote you. But maybe, someday, someone else will find this place. And feel safe enough to speak. Or silent enough to hear. The latrine exhales one final time. And you rise. Not cleaner. But clearer. Not wiser. But warmer. And as you step through the archway, into the cooling Roman dusk, you carry something with you. A name, maybe? A moment. A little truth tucked in your chest like a folded scroll. And that is enough.